Some investigations end when a sentence is handed down, others remain open for years. But there are cases in which the greatest harm is not caused by a murderer, but by the lost opportunities to stop him. This is one of those stories. For more than 3 decades, a single question haunted an entire community. It was not who had committed the crimes. Many were convinced of that from the very beginning. The real question was another one. How many times did justice have the opportunity to stop him? And above all, how many lives were affected because it did not? It all began in October 1986. The disappearance of 2 9-year-old girls mobilized neighbors, family members, and more than 100 officers. The search lasted for hours, and little by little, hope began to fade. Eventually, the bodies were found in a nearby wooded area. The news struck the entire community. Families were devastated, and police launched the largest murder investigation ever conducted in Sussex at that time. From very early on, one name began to be repeated: Russell Bishop. He was known in the area. He was also known to police due to prior minor offenses. He had been seen in the vicinity, and several testimonies placed him at key moments. Investigators gathered different pieces of evidence. A blue sweatshirt found near where the victims were discovered contained fibers compatible with the clothing the girls were wearing and traces of vegetation from the area where they had been found. Everything pointed to the fact that whoever had worn that garment had been at the crime scene. Officers needed to prove that the sweatshirt belonged to Russell Bishop. And then they thought they had succeeded. When police went to his home, his partner immediately recognized the garment and signed a sworn statement saying it belonged to Russell Bishop. For investigators, that was enough. They were convinced they had the perpetrator. In December 1986, Russell Bishop was formally charged. It seemed the case had come to an end, but the first opportunity for justice was about to be lost. When the trial began, the woman who had identified the sweatshirt completely changed her testimony. In court, she claimed the garment had never belonged to Bishop and stated she had been pressured by police to testify. The prosecution lost one of its key pieces of evidence. After several weeks of trial, the jury found Russell Bishop not guilty. The decision caused disbelief. Investigators remained convinced they had charged the right man. The families could not understand what had happened, but for the law, the case was over. And then another problem appeared. At that time, legislation prevented a person from being tried twice for the same crime. Even if new evidence appeared in the future, Russell Bishop could not be brought before a court again for those murders. He had walked free. But that was not all. While families tried to move on, Russell Bishop began occupying spaces that were difficult to understand. He took part in public events related to the case. He attended marches organized by the victims' own families. He gave interviews. He received money for telling his version of events. He even pointed to the father of one of the victims as a possible suspect. Police investigated those accusations and concluded they were completely unfounded. But the damage had already been done. The family had to endure rumors and accusations while the man who had been tried for those crimes continued proclaiming his innocence. Over time, the investigation lost momentum until a letter arrived. On February 2nd, 1990, Sussex police officially communicated that the case was closed. It was, in theory, the end. But just 2 days later, justice lost another opportunity. On the afternoon of February 4th, 1990, a 7-year-old girl went out to buy sweets and did not return home. Hours later, she was found alone, showing signs of having suffered an assault. Police launched an urgent search. The description provided by the girl quickly led to a name well known to investigators: Russell Bishop. When officers arrived at his home, they found something that caught their attention. His car was being cleaned. Inside the trunk, they found a hammer and a can of WD-40. Fibers and biological evidence were also found linking the girl directly to Russell Bishop. This time, the evidence was overwhelming. The victim was able to identify him during an identification parade, and in December 1990, he was convicted of kidnapping, sexual assault, and attempted murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. But even then, for many people, the same feeling remained. Justice had acted, but it had come too late. If the 1987 trial had ended differently, that attack would never have happened. Years passed, the conviction did not erase the questions, nor did it remove the fear. In 2004, it became known that Russell Bishop could be eligible for parole. The news caused fear and concern. However, something had changed. In 2005, a law that had stood for centuries was amended. From that moment on, a person who had been acquitted could be retried if new compelling evidence emerged. For the first time in many years, the possibility of correcting that mistake existed again. But it would not be easy. Investigators needed something that had not existed during the first trial: new evidence, and for years they kept searching. The old blue sweatshirt was still important, but there were doubts about possible contamination of the samples. Then another possibility emerged. Decades earlier, forensic teams had preserved under seal several adhesive tapes taken during autopsies. Technology in the 1980s had not allowed them to be analyzed, but now it did. The results showed a mixed genetic profile. Russell Bishop's DNA was present. That changed everything. In 2016, he was arrested again. He continued to claim he was innocent. He continued to say none of it was connected to him. But this time, justice had one last opportunity. In 2018, a new trial began. More than 30 years had passed. The defense tried to explain the presence of DNA by arguing that Bishop had attempted to check the victim's pulse when they were found. However, testimony from officers present at the scene contradicted that version. In addition, letters written by Bishop decades earlier were revealed during the trial, containing sexual content addressed to a minor. The situation became increasingly untenable. After 32 years, the jury needed only a few hours to reach a decision. Russell Bishop was found guilty. At last, justice corrected an error that had taken more than 3 decades to resolve. But the feeling was strange. There was no celebration because no one could recover the lost time. No one could erase the suffering of the families, and no one could change what happened in 1990. Justice had prevailed, but it had come too late. In 2021, the woman who had changed her testimony during the first trial was convicted of perjury, and in 2022, Russell Bishop died in prison. His story ended behind bars. But for many, the question never disappeared. What would have happened if the first opportunity had not been wasted? Because sometimes justice does not fail due to lack of evidence. It fails because it arrives when the damage has already been done.